Welcome, everyone. I'm Haley Hansen. I'm a partner in the higher education team of Husch Blackwell, and we're happy to have you here today. So today, before I begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console, there are multiple application icons for your use during the program today. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them via the question box. We will try to answer your questions if we can. Sometimes we get a lot of questions or we run out of time. And so if that happens, you're welcome to follow up with your Husch Blackwell contact afterwards as well, if that's something that you need to get a response to. So also there's a PDF of today's presentation, and it is in the program materials folder. So if you click on that folder, you can get a copy of the presentation materials. This program has also been approved for legal education hours. For live attendees, report your hours by clicking on the CEU sign-in icon at the bottom of the screen, and a certificate of attendance and the course number will be emailed to you tomorrow along with the recording of the webinar, and you are welcome to watch again if you missed part of it or share it with your colleagues on your campuses. Towards the end of the program, we will also ask you to complete a short survey. This helps us with feedback for this webinar and also planning our future webinars. So that's all the housekeeping items that I have. Let's go ahead and get started. I am so excited to have joining with me today three amazing professionals that are supporting the higher ed group. First, Dr. Chuck Ambrose, Christine Fabin, and Dr. Therese Scanlon. Chuck is a senior consultant here at Husch Blackwell Consulting, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Husch Blackwell. He has over 40 years of service in college presidents' offices, including 23 years as a college president himself. And he supports higher education institutions and their leaders with student-centered focus, helping them access and use new tools and data to be able to build sustainable futures for higher ed. So very happy to have Chuck with us today. Christine Fabin is a partner here in Kansas City that supports the higher education team, specifically with immigration. She focuses on labor and employment issues and immigration. She's a former corporate attorney of a multi-billion-dollar company and understands organizations and understands immigration. And we lean on her consistently to support our clients with a variety of immigration matters. So we're very happy to have Christine with us today. And then finally, Dr. Therese Scanlon. Therese is an education consultant with Husch Blackwell Education. Prior to joining Husch Blackwell Consulting, she has devoted her career over the last 30 years working with colleges and universities, and most recently was the president of Oak Point University, where she oversaw a large growth in their student population and enrollment over 8 years. So Therese has a very unique perspective and will be adding to our conversation as well. So welcome, Therese, Christine, and Chuck. Thanks so much for joining me today. All right, so let's go ahead and get started, and we're going to start right off the bat with a poll question. So today we're talking about immigration and its effect on and impact on your campuses. So what percentage of your student population is comprised of international students? A is less than 1%, B 1 to 3%, between 3 to 5%, or over 5%. So if you go ahead and submit your responses, that would be great. It's always interesting to get to know, who's on the call and how many students that you may have at your institutions that are dealing with some of the issues that we're going to talk about. So I've got about 20% of the attendees that have submitted so far. I'll give you just a little bit more. We'll try to get up to about 50%. All right, so we're a little over 50%, so let me just show you the results. And we saw about 30% is between 1 to 3% of your overall student population, and then 3 to 5%, 25 and over 5% is 34% of the people answering. So a very significant piece of a lot of your student population is comprised of international students. So as we talk about the topics we're going to cover today, we're going to kind of go over into two parts. Essentially, we're going to give you an update on international students and what's happening from a legal perspective, the legal issues that are impacting international students, and then we're going to go into some case studies. Could this impact your institution as you go into the fall semester? And so as we look at that, we really want to try to be as practical as possible to try to help identify what are things that you can do in this ever-changing dynamic when it comes to the status of international students. So with that, Christine, I'm going to turn it over to you and you can give us an update.
Thank you so much, Haley. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It has been a wild year. I feel like that is the only way to put it. As many of you know, there has been a massive uptick in immigration activity across universities and campuses. I don't know how many folks I've spoken to in the higher ed space. I don't know, I would say in the last 7 months that have said, Christine, I have learned more immigration in the past few months than I have in my entire career. I just feel like it's been pretty all-consuming. So happy to be having this conversation, definitely happy to answer questions as they come up. And anything that we don't cover, please feel free to reach out. So before we jump into international students specifically, just kind of a 10,000 foot view of what we've been seeing across the board. We have seen heightened enforcement and activities by ICE and HSI, excuse me. HSI, for those of you that don't work really regularly in the immigration space, is Homeland Security investigations. They're the ones that are showing up to campuses and presenting notices, specifically as they relate to international students. We've also, for those of you that sponsor foreign national faculty and staff, are seeing massive delays in processing of petition types like H-1Bs and TNs. We're also seeing an uptick in requests for evidences and denials, which is on par with what we saw the first time around with the current administration. And then, of course, international travel visas remains top of mind for a lot of our higher education clients, specifically as it relates to faculty, staff, and international students. We're fielding a lot of questions about, how much advice universities and colleges should be giving as it relates to travel, support that the institutions can or should provide. And then also, whether or not foreign national students specifically should be encouraged to enroll or withdraw in study abroad programs. So with that, the reason why we are all here, international students, it has been drama. I feel like that's the only word to describe what the last 7 months has been. But I feel like the trends with international students, we've seen this kind of wave of drama a bit, for all intents and purposes, over the last 10 years. We saw kind of the uptick with the international student enrollment decline during the current administration's first term. And then that really swung into gear and we saw a massive dip with COVID-19. In the past few years, based on what I have seen, and I think based on what the data tells us, we have seen a steady increase in admissions and enrollment. And that it's looked great up until Operation Catch and Revoke. So good old Operation Catch and Revoke was announced, I'm sure all of you know, earlier this spring. Secretary of State Marco Rubio essentially came out and announced, that the Department of State would be reviewing student visas and student activity, and that students who were engaged in any activity that the Department of State deemed un-American would have their visas revoked. this was really weird. In my decade plus of basically exclusively immigration work, I had not seen a whole lot of these. And we saw, I mean, as many of you are aware, just an absolute wave of these revocations. Really, the revocations kind of sat in three buckets. The first bucket was for those students that Department of State deemed to have been involved in protests or any activity that they labeled as anti-Semitic. Those students, that was kind of the first wave of visa revocations we saw. That was a smaller body of the revocations. There were probably about 300 or so that we saw initially. And shortly after the revocations by Department of State, PDSOs and DSOs were seeing that the SEVIS records, which is, for those of you that are new to immigration, SEVIS is the system that houses all of the international student files. Shortly thereafter, we saw SEVIS records for those foreign national students be withdrawn, revoked, terminated. After that first initial wave, we saw a couple additional waves that were larger in volume. The first of which was individuals that the Department of State thought had some sort of infraction, so any type of like law enforcement run-in. We were seeing students with traffic violations to more egregious violent types of accusations have their SEVIS records terminated. For a lot of those, the visas were not revoked, which was kind of an interesting change because initially we were seeing the visas revoked and then the SEVIS records terminated. But with the second, more larger wave, we were really seeing what appeared to be ICE going through law enforcement systems and flagging any international students whose name appeared. I will also note that there was a smaller group of people who also had their SEVIS records terminated, and that group of foreign nationals, those terminations seem to be really linked to their social media presence and statements or likes that were deemed to be anti-American. So it was a lot. I mean, I felt like every day I was waking up to just emails from our clients saying, Christine, there's more, you know, what do we do? We're worried for these students. We're, you know, not sure how to proceed. And frankly, there's not a whole lot of precedent because the enforcement action that the current administration has taken against international students is unlike anything I think any of us have ever seen before. So of course, you know, in light of these visa revocations and SEVIS terminations, we saw a wave of arrests and threats of deportation. I will kind of highlight a couple of things here. The arrests and the threats of deportation were absolutely more than we've seen in years past. I will say, however, just so that you all are aware, something I learned actually in the last 7 months is that ICE is now traveling with their own PR team. So when they go to detain students, they are likely rolling around with a PR team, which is recording everything. And so the media frenzy around the detentions, arrests, and deportations of international students has really been a strategic effort that the current administration has undertaken. So just keep that in mind. The other thing that I thought was interesting was that for the most part, we were seeing ICE make these arrests not on campuses. They were waiting outside of student homes, their places of work, or otherwise locations not on college campuses, which I thought was interesting and probably, frankly, smart on their behalf, right? it's a lot easier to show up to a student's house than to have to walk through a college campus and, you know, try to arrest a student in a quad. So it's been a lot, but keep in mind that with what seems to be all-encompassing, so much of that is a really strategic effort by the agency to stoke fear. So, you know, over the course of the spring, there were thousands of revocations, and by revocations, I mean both revocations and terminations of CVIS records. A lot of those terminations of CVIS records have been reinstated, and Haley will talk more about that later. But I think the question that's top of mind for a lot of the clients that I work with is, you know, what's next, you know, and is there next? Because at this point we feel like we're maybe out of the woods, but I'm not quite sure that we are yet, especially because we've got 3.5 years left of this administration. And I think that they've really set the groundwork for what their mentality and philosophy is as it pertains to universities, colleges, higher education, and international students. So in the immigration world, I think the thought is that we're gonna see more visa revocations. I've learned that the current administration learns from their mistakes. They get more strategic about how they go about enforcing things. And I think what they learned from, you know, the first round, and we'll talk about, you know, the legal update, but I think what they learned from the first round was that it's a lot more difficult to challenge actions that are taken by the Department of State versus actions that are taken by Department of Homeland Security. So my guess is that we will see more visa revocations that are issued by the Department of State. And Secretary Marco Rubio effectively said, you know, more or less the same thing. He announced, I believe via tweet, that Department of State would begin aggressively revoking visas, specifically as it relates to Chinese nationals connected to the Chinese Nationalist Party or studying in critical fields, which in my experience probably accounts for 99% of our Chinese national students. So, you know, again, I don't have a crystal ball or a magic 8 ball, but my guess is that we will continue to see visa revocations. We will continue to see the current administration go after foreign national students. But my guess is that they'll pivot based on what they're learning works and does not work. So with that, I am going to loop in Haley to talk to us a bit more about the legal issues impacting international students.
Yes, thanks, Christine. Very helpful. And I may ask you to give your opinion on some of this as well as we move forward. But as we really look at, okay, from a legal perspective, what has happened? What have we seen in the Trump administration? So international students file a lawsuit in late April. More than 290 students or graduates who their CVIS records were terminated, as Christine was talking about, sued the federal government with more than 100 lawsuits alleging due process violations. And federal district courts across the country issued temporary restraining orders that prohibited the Trump administration from really acting on those terminations. And so that was kind of the status of the lawsuits. And on April 25th, ICE issued a statement noting that they would be reinstating the CVIS records for plaintiffs in a Massachusetts case, as well as several of the other cases. However, ICE, Customs and Border Protection, and the Department of Homeland Security and the State Department continue to use visa cancellations for criminal offenses and to cancel visas and seek deportation for those who they believe should be removed from the U.S. And so we've seen this back and forth in the courts, and we've really seen that a lot of the issues that we're facing in higher ed. Of we'll have a policy position, an executive order, something that the Trump administration issues, and then we will have a lawsuit. Typically, they are looking for temporary relief or a temporary restraining order like they did in this case, and then the case will continue to make its way through the courts. Now, it is important to understand that when judges provide that temporary relief, it's because there's a likelihood of success on the plaintiffs who have brought that case on the merits of the case. And so I do think that's important, at least with where some of these federal judges may be going, at least with the claims that have been brought. But there's been a lot that just keeps going on. And so then after we have these lawsuits, then in May, the end of May, Secretary Rubio directed U.S. embassies and consulates abroad to really pause the new student visa interview appointments. And that pause began at the end of May, and it was supposed to lift, and they were supposed to take new appointments June 18th. And we did not hear of students getting appointments until really the start of last week, very within the week in terms of getting new appointments. And so, and again, the diplomatic officials were, according to some news reports, directed to identify and deny applicants who bear hostile attitudes towards our citizens. And a lot of the court cases have said that some of this language that has been used as to, making determinations of something that is anti-American or hostile to the United States is very vague and ambiguous and doesn't give a lot of direction for who's making these decisions. And so what results in sometimes when that happens is that there's arbitrary or capricious decisions, they're not understanding what the standards are. And so I think it's important that that's one of the things that the courts have looked at. As Christine said, I think that Trump administration, Secretary Rubio, will look at this and maybe give some more guidance as well in terms of what things that they consider to be, hostile attitudes towards our citizens, culture, or government, or founding principles, to really understand, how these applications and these visa applications are being, when they're being denied. So, Christine, I'm going to turn it back over to you to talk just about the next couple slides about the travel ban, but obviously that kind of plays into all of these moving parts in terms of what's happening from a legal perspective.
Yeah, no, sure. I will tell you all, being an immigration attorney, I feel like for months there were days where I'd get to my computer and I'd say, okay, today I'm going to finally finish X, Y, and Z. And then I'd get notification of the travel ban. And then there's my week. So at the beginning of June, we got notification that the administration was going to issue a travel ban. They learned again from the last administration on how to go about doing things like a travel ban without the risk of it being enjoined in the courts. In terms of how I've seen the travel ban impact schools, so I guess there's really two sets of international students. The first set of international students are the international students that are from one of these countries who are currently in the US and currently on university college campuses. Those students are not impacted, right? Meaning they can remain in the US, continue to study, so long as they don't leave. In the event that they leave the US, there's no way they're getting back in it. They'll be very, very hard pressed to be able to re-enter if they leave, right? So for instance, I have a good amount of clients that have students from Haiti and Iran. If those students depart the US, it's unlikely they'll be able to return. I think maybe even more concerning for a lot of our schools are those students who have been admitted to a university or college program from one of the banned countries who are currently outside of the US, how do you secure a visa, an F1, a J1, an M1 visa for, an admitted individual who's currently in Sudan? It's going to be very hard, if not impossible. And I think for this year, thankfully, most admitted students from these countries have secured their visas. I think the concern is moving forward, are schools going to be able to admit students who are currently outside of the US from these countries? I don't know. So that is kind of where we sit currently with the travel ban. Here's kind of a map of where these countries sit, but certainly happy as you all are kind of navigating international students from the various banned countries to chat with you as questions come up.
All right, I'll take it over. Yeah. Okay, so what everybody's followed and talking about is Trump versus Harvard. So the Trump administration's ongoing feud with Harvard University includes efforts really to revoke eligibility in CVIS in the student and visitor exchange program, and has made numerous requests and attempts to try to get records of international students from Harvard regarding the participation in the protests that were on Harvard's campus after the protests that occurred as a result of the war in Gaza. And so that essentially is what a lot of this comes down to. And so Harvard ended up filing suit against the Trump administration on May 23rd. And again, a lot of this comes with funding and has other considerations other than just international students as well. As a lot of the headlines have read, $2 billion in funding is at stake from the federal government that Harvard receives. In response to the lawsuit, then President Trump issued a proclamation essentially doubling down on their position regarding Harvard and specifically on international students. And there's currently 7,000 international students that are enrolled as of last year at Harvard. And so there's not an insignificant population of international students that are coming from really all over the place, and some of them are on undergrads, some are in graduate schools. And so then we saw the judge in this case issue a temporary injunction on the president's proclamation and grant Harvard's request for a preliminary injunction, finding that Harvard was likely to succeed. Again, that's the finding. So there has to be an evidentiary hearing, and the lawyers present evidence on what the case is about to the judge. And so the judge on June 23rd granted Harvard's request for this injunction that they would likely succeed on their claims that there were constitutional and statutory violations with regard to the actions that President Trump and the administration had taken. And so the Trump administration has appealed the court case as of yesterday. And so it was good that I checked this to make sure. Didn't get it in the slides because we couldn't add it in the slides. But as of yesterday, Kristi Noem of the Department of Homeland Security issued subpoenas to Harvard for the same records that are at issue from the beginning of this. And so we're now going to see issues that are subpoenas that have been issued for different types of student records, specifically disciplinary records as well, targeting international students, and then ultimately whether or not that the Trump administration can revoke the ability to have international students by Harvard as well. And in an op-ed piece that was actually the same day as the judge issued a ruling in favor of Harvard, Kristi Noem said that she was ready and willing to, again, revoke the participation in the Student and Visitor Exchange Program, or we refer to it as CVIS, where all the information is contained as well. And so the Trump versus Harvard will continue on. This is, I should have a slide that says to be continued, because it seems like each day there's something else that will happen. So the likely effects on international students. So let's kind of wrap this legal piece up and really talk. So during the first Trump administration, new international student enrollment actually declined for the first time since 2005, 2006. Now, obviously, COVID, there was a huge decline. But as you saw from the chart that Christine put up, there's been a rapid increase, specifically in graduate programs of international students coming to the U.S. to participate in graduate programs. And that has happened as we've seen. And so, as we've seen the administration creating all of these barriers, and there's this shifting policy, and there's uncertainty, which is a lot of this. A lot of students may choose not to study in the U.S. because there's not, I think, Christine, you get asked this a lot more than I do, but schools are saying, what should we tell students? And it's still up in the air. A lot of this has not been decided. And so is there a true answer of cut and dry, black and white, this is what we can tell you? The answer is no. We're in a gray area right now. And so, we're giving the best advice that we can based on the facts that have been provided, but it's a new world and an ever-changing world. It feels like the ground is shifting underneath administrators at schools trying to advise their students. Christine, anything you want to add to that?
Oh, I think that's exactly right, Haley. I will also note, in the event that we were in an industry that wasn't higher education, we wouldn't have the CVIP certification hanging above our heads. We'd be able to maybe put our shoulder to the wheel a bit more. But because Department of Homeland Security has really been given so much discretion with the CVIP certification, any sort of pushback or any sort of wrong move could potentially put our CVIP certifications and our ability to continue enrolling international students at risk. So it's kind of a frightening time for all intents and purposes, because that CVIP certification is so critical to so many of our schools.
And there was kind of a delay in getting back to schools on their certification or recertification. It's been slower than we have seen. Obviously, we've seen a lot of cuts at the federal government itself. And so, nothing is going kind of as we anticipated. And so therefore, you can imagine, or I can imagine with the clients that I'm counseling, I'm sure you are too, Christine, that there's just so much uncertainty because, things are going very slowly, and they feel like a lot of schools, like they don't want to push too hard or they're going to get a very negative response.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I was telling a client recently, what was best practice last year is now obstruction of justice, so it is the Wild West, it feels like.
Yeah. So with that, we're going to turn it over to some scenarios of what can we do in these situations. So let's get a poll question before we start our scenarios. So are you concerned about the legal issues that we just talked about and possible impact on your international students at your institution? Very concerned, somewhat concerned, or following the news, but not really sure that this is going to impact. So we'll go ahead and let you submit your responses, and then we'll turn it over to some scenarios. Got about 25% of people submitting. I'll wait till we get a little bit closer to 50 just to kind of see where the group is as we move forward with our next section. Okay, a little over 50%, so I'll show you where we are. So a lot of people are very concerned, and there's, at least some that are in this category of they're watching, but not as concerned for their students. I think that a lot of the people in the very concerned category also are schools that potentially have investigations with the Department of Education, specifically regarding protests that happened on campus as well. And then other very concerns to me of my clients are people that have a large population of international students in one particular area, and that can, if those students, if their ability to study within the U.S. is affected, that's really going to impact the institution as well. So let's talk about that. So let's talk about our case studies. All right, so we're going to talk about, we have two different case studies, and Chuck, I'm going to ask you about this one first. So we have a private religiously affiliated institution with approximately 5,100 students. Out of those 5,100 students, 1,500 are graduate students. A large group of graduate students are majoring in data science and analytics, approximately 600 students, and are from countries where the number of visas provided is significantly down. The institution has invested in international recruitment with an outside provider, and there is a contract that they have with that outside international recruitment provider that's in the second year of a 5-year term. Graduate students receive minimal aid, again, and the largest group is graduate students of their international population. The undergraduate international enrollment is significantly less, but heavily discounted because a lot of those students are student athletes. The administrative leadership believes that the graduate program, that it's very important to have the support from the graduate program, and that there's going to be some big impacts if the student enrollment changes. And the institution does not offer online graduate degrees, but has considered moving programs online to reach more international students. So the questions to consider for this one are, what issues will this private institution face regarding its graduate international population? How would the institution potentially make changes to its current financial model? And then the last one, Chuck, which I'll answer, is are there legal issues to be aware when you're addressing cash flow? So Chuck, I'll turn it over to you to really talk about how would you address this scenario?
Yeah, thanks, Haley. And for those of us who lived through this in the late fall of 2015 or early 16, in many ways, it feels like we're back to the future in some ways. And last week, it was widely reported that Moody's had offered a credit risk for those institutions who are reliant on international enrollment, and kind of added another provision for those who were operating on slim margins. And of course, I think Christine and Haley both mentioned these are not the only headwinds, right, that are kind of affecting our margins. It could be overall demographics, it could be availability of federal aid. There's just so many things that can affect margins. The framework, right, that we recommend kind of pays attention both to utilizing your assets as effectively as you can, but more particularly your operating integrity. This is not, again, unfamiliar for those of us who have kind of considered strategic finance over the last several years. But as the Moody's warning points out, there's 11% of institutions that have over 20% international enrollment. They also point out what a 15% reduction in that international enrollment modeling could mean to your operating integrity, bringing many institutions into negative territory. We kind of picked scenario one to hit several major issues. Not all international students are full pay, but a reliance on graduate education to provide subsidy, right, subsidization to other lower performing programs is widely used. If you have budgeted those to operate, instead of utilizing that as somewhat of a reserve or value add to your bottom line, then you know that feeling, right? I can remember the conversation with our provost to say, we will not go back to relying on international graduate enrollment as a heavy reliance on operating integrity. So in this scenario, private institution, slim margin, We do point out, again, that many of the undergraduate students may actually be at a more cost than they are net tuition revenue. So the disruption in enrollment for some in international enrollment has a little different impact on the bottom line than other sectors. So a couple real intense suggestions. Know your data, right? Know where you are, and then know what questions to ask that are absolutely most important. Without question, I think Haley and Christine utilized the word uncertainty. And we've lived through the last couple months with a lot of preemptive actions on the part of institutions. Just like Christine said, the news changes every week for the dynamics that schools are challenged with. Well, so does the financial decision making. We've seen a lot of cost containment this summer to begin to reduce spend, to align with what may be anticipated revenue. But as we move this forward, private institution, perhaps heavily discounted, subsidizing with high net graduate tuition revenue, probably the most important and first thing to pay attention to is liquidity. Know your cash flows. And if you've been reliant on, again, a very productive form of revenue in your monthly cash, and that's disrupted because of a downturn in, say, your graduate education, then you want to be positioned to consider that now, not necessarily wait till the middle of September for census, not wait for that first quarterly board meeting to think about budget adjustments, but consider the levers that you may pull now. And with that, a very helpful resource. Again, hopefully, and I'm going to mention hope first because I think that's important. Our international enrollment is very resilient. The demand for U.S. education will remain high. These students will work as hard as they can to overcome the barriers that may get in front of them because that over 1 million students has reset back to pre-COVID levels because these students work, the human level of this, they work very hard to enroll in our institutions. So as you're tracking going in, not to budget, but to your monthly ins and outs, especially on thin margins, as Moody references, it would be really helpful to have a good operating cash pro forma in place. And know what the demands is on your cash as you move, not just through the fall semester. We all know that will get even more acute next year, going into spring, and begin to think if there are challenges to liquidity that you begin to operate differently now. And think differently about your spending, think differently about your approvals, know that budgets don't equal cash, and stay diligent, right, in not waiting too long to respond. Because again, we really may not know what the impact of all of the immigration and legal considerations for international education is in the next 60 days, right, until enrollments materialize. The second scenario will have some other critical data. The first scenario being private, being dependent on that enrollment and that tuition revenue, our suggestions is just pay especially attention to liquidity and cash. And then, as we've done before, Haley, together in a prior life, you have to utilize the legal considerations about how we make decisions with that data to not only be strategically aligned financially, but to be in compliance to the restrictions that are put in place in front of our students.
Yeah, as we're looking at that, the potential legal issues, first, the student visa status. And I know that Christine and I talked a lot about, what is the legal status, but, Christine, generally, how are you working with schools, to communicate information? I mean, a lot of times it's very fact specific and will be very, person specific. But, if you have this large population of 600 graduate students in a particular area. And sometimes our schools, they're concentrated in one particular country as well. What's your advice for, working with our students and communications from our schools?
Yeah, that's a great question, Haley. I think that based on what I've seen, it is very, very fact specific. Those schools, I will say, those schools which do require students to have and maintain lawful immigration status during the duration of their enrollment are going to likely run into some issues because, today, given the current immigration environment, today a student may have valid immigration status, but based on what we've seen the past 7 months, that could change tomorrow. So in terms of student visa status, I think that it's going to be important for our schools to really think about what policy procedure looks like because it's just so volatile right now.
I agree. And making sure that that's communicated of what do you do to help, what do you not do to help? Because I think, some students really have larger expectations that they really don't have any, that maybe the school is going to do a lot more to assist than the school's policies and procedures actually allow for. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah. All right. The second is really talking about contracts. So under this scenario, there was a contract for a recruiter from particular countries, and they were in the second of a 5-year term. So what do you do when you have a contract like that? And, potentially these, they may slow down of getting students, those types of things. Now, obviously, there's no incentive compensation band like there is for any other types of recruiters that are recruiting U.S. students because international students are not eligible typically to get any type of federal financial aid. And so, the contracts are usually worded in a different way. But the interesting part is a lot of times, and I've seen this way more than I've seen the other way, is that we have contracts that are being entered into by deans, by really academic leaders that are not going through the protocol of going to your general counsel's office, and they're just signing because they're thinking there's no downside to these contracts, and there can be some downsides to these contracts. And so making sure that you have a process, making sure that your general counsel or your outside counsel is reviewing them for you so that you don't get stuck in the second year of a 5-year contract that you're going to be paying on but not realizing benefits from, or benefits in the same way that were thought that you were going to receive when the contract was actually signed. So be very careful about that. Programmatic changes and accreditation standards kind of go hand in hand of, do you want to try to do online programs? And, obviously during COVID, there was a large scale approval of everyone being able to go online, but now a lot of programs are not online, and are only in the classroom or on campus or those types of things. And so really looking at what are your particular programs that you may want to reach more individuals. Is that allowable? And then what do you need to do? Is a substantive change that you need to go through to get your accreditation standards to make sure that those programs continue to be accredited? Because I do think that's important. It's not like you can just flip the switch and suddenly something that was, and I know we did that during COVID, but that was allowed because of COVID. It isn't typically allowed. And so looking at all of those things can really affect the legal issues that really can affect all of the things that Chuck was talking about when addressing your cash flow and how to make changes. And, and it's important to consider these because you're trying to be nimble, you're trying to make decisions to address these things. But if you take the wrong legal path, then it may cost you more than you saved to be nimble and work through that legal path.
And Haley, it is important to mention that the international market doesn't respond quite the same way to online programs as they do to in-person. There's a high demand, right, to have a visa and study in the United States.
Yes, I totally agree. Okay, let's move on to scenario 2, and we have one more poll question. So this is State University. has had student protests regarding the war in Gaza. The university is currently under investigation by the Department of Education for anti-Semitism. The university anticipates 9% of its undergraduate student body for the next year will be international students. The university was recently involved in a public dispute with the state legislature regarding its DE&I programs, and state lawmakers have said that they were going to withhold funds from the university for blatant disregard for state law that had banned DE&I efforts. And the state is planning to withhold for the next academic year. So Therese, I'm going to ask you these questions so you think about those as we're talking our next poll question. But what are going to be some options, because there's going to be some immediate shortfalls that from a variety of factors that are coming in, not only international students and visas and the things that Chuck talked about, but DE&I. And then how do you address the number of majors and minors as you're looking at this as well? So here's our poll question. Has your institution taken preemptive steps to anticipate a loss of revenue from international enrollments? Yes or no? And we won't wait too long on this one just because we're quickly running out of time. I always think that our webinars, we're going to have plenty of time. We'll have lots of time, and then we go right up to the end. So, all right, let's get some responses. All right. So we got about 50-50. So right in the middle there, Therese. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah. So, wow, what a time of uncertainty and a time to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? Because we don't know what's going to hit us every other day. So I think, one of the biggest things that an institution can do in a situation where you're getting hit from, it seems like all sides, is know your data. Chuck talked about that in the first scenario, but understanding from a academic performance and program viability perspective of what does it really cost you to offer a course, and what is it, what are the direct instructional costs, the indirect instructional costs? Is there capacity in what your faculty are teaching so that you can reduce the number of sections of courses and utilize different metrics in order to monitor that? There's some short-term things that you can do as far as looking at your efficiencies, and for a state institution who is probably receiving anywhere from 10 to 60, 70% of their funding from the state, that's a huge hit to an institution, and it's really hard to make huge impacts immediately. But if you know your data and you actually really think about being as transparent as possible with your campus so that they understand why you're making those decisions about changing course loads and asking people to do things maybe a little bit differently in a very quick manner, then it doesn't come off as emotional or reactive, that it's really a data-informed decision. And I think the other piece is, on the administrative side, because it's not just on the academic side of the house, it's a joint effort for administrative efficiencies, and really looking at, what kind of processes do you have in place? What kind of things and safeguards do you have to review, kind of all the things that are going on campus, whether it's capital projects, whether it's different kinds of initiatives that are really important to the campus, but maybe need to be put on hold because you just don't have the cash in order to do it right now. Data collection and utilization is really going to be important in order to survive this kind of impact to the campus. And so, there's tools available on campuses, or we have them at Husch Blackwell Consulting to be able to help a campus understand what their data looks like, and be able to help make those changes, because this isn't just a one-time change for this institution or any others. With the international student population, if they leave, your spring numbers could be impacted, and then who knows what's going to happen with next year. So you have to be prepared and kind of look at all the different scenarios, which can really impact your financial bottom line, not only for this year, but in the future.
All right. Oh, one more. There we go. Here. All right. So, the last potential legal issues, obviously there's been a lot regarding DE&I, and, we've had executive orders, we've had state legislatures take action. And so in this case, understanding the legislation, understanding what you can and cannot do. A lot of schools have, looked at not only what the federal government is saying also, but looked at what their specific state is saying and made changes to, to continue to support every student, but have, some schools have changed the name or changed, parts of their ongoing programs because they didn't want to fall in the situation of this particular school. And so I think it's important to understand where you are and get advice specifically from your general counsel or outside counsel of what the best path is to address the issues that the state legislature are complaining about, and whether or not those, if be addressed, that the state funding would be restored, because we've seen some schools that have done those things and then they say, sorry, you're too late, we're not going to give you the funds anyway. And so, I think there's a level of understanding or lobbying, that you would do with your lobbyists as well to understand what your funding is going to look like. So our takeaways, I think as Therese and Chuck really said, we've got to understand data as you're looking at some of these legal issues. So, it's an interesting place to be as an attorney. And Christine, I think we've had, as she said, just it's been something new every day since this administration has taken over with regard to immigration and a lot of other issues as well. So I do think it's important that you really, look at your data, make strategic decisions, implement necessary changes, but understand that there's legal issues that then impact kind of some of the decisions that you can make strategically as you go forward as well. So with that, I think we have a minute for questions. Christine, did you see any questions in the chat that you wanted to bring up in the group?
Let me look.
So I think a lot of people are asking about timing, and my general response on timing is we don't know. It seems like every situation is different. Well, somebody will say, well, will this be done within 3 months? I don't know that we can say that at this time. What do you think, Christine? I mean, in terms of timing of applications or of, it just seems like giving advice like that, of knowing what the government is going to do at this time, is not good advice, because we really don't know.
I think that's exactly right. For those of you on the call that work with me, I often say practicing and working in the immigration space right now feels like working on the engine of a car and the car is running. Like there's just no good way to know in terms of things like timing, or, there were a handful of questions about enforcement actions and rumors of enforcement actions. I think that we're all just in a place where we kind of just have to wait and see. Unfortunately, it's my worst. It's my least favorite thing to have to say. But I think that the administration has kind of put our backs in a bit of a corner.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it is difficult to know what's coming next, but it's important to be able, again, when you look at your institutional resources and being able to plan. And it's always good to plan for the worst and then something not so bad happens. That's good, right? Yes, I think Chuck and Therese, when you were presidents, you probably had contingency plans if something very bad happened, and then hopefully that did not happen.
Yeah, Haley, there's a great question that's asked about the role of the PDSO on campus. It's similar to y'all as general counsel, right, that are frontline trying to deal with the dynamics and how empowered they need to be and supported, because they're really literally the front line on student uncertainty and questions and interpretation. And I'd certainly want to lift them up because in many ways, especially for the students who are already here, given that uncertainty of whether they're staying in status or maybe that's going to be revoked, But a critical question, another resource allocation that institutions need to consider, because again, those are frontline folks that are having to help filter all this change directly to students.
Yeah. Well, thank you all, Christine, Chuck, Therese, for being with us today. Thank you. Thanks everyone for attending. We really appreciate your questions and being able to speak with you today. Again, there's a QR code. If you would like additional information, please feel free to open that code if you'd like more information, or to talk with Chuck or Therese about some of the tools and data that they were talking about. As a reminder, this program has been approved for legal education credit. To report your hours, click on the CEU icon at the bottom of the screen, and you will get a recording of the webinar to watch and share with others at your institution tomorrow. Please complete this short survey. We really appreciate it. It's very useful feedback. And this concludes our webinar. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time today.